In 3, 2. Hello, you are listening to Finding My Way, a podcast where we interview students and faculty of various disciplines to help prospective students learn more about the fields that they're interested in. Today, we'll be covering the Bachelor of Science in Biological Sciences, a degree offered through USC Dornsife College of Letters, Arts, and Sciences. The Bachelor of Biological Sciences, or more commonly referred to as a bio degree, is one of the most popular majors chosen every year. Here to talk to us a bit more about it is USC alum George Michael. George is from Torrance, California, and graduated this last year from USC with a BA in Biological Sciences, as well as a BS in Pharmacology and Drug Development. Thanks so much for joining us here today, George.
Anytime. Glad that you had me.
It's my pleasure. I know you're a busy guy with all your med school apps and everything, so really appreciate it.
I'll take it as a break.
Yeah,
so, this is
that's
good.
fair. Well, you're not shy from a lot of hard work, double majoring in a BA in Biological Sciences and a BS in Pharmacology. That's kind of crazy, dude. Like, how did you manage both of those?
Well, all right. So it was actually a funny story. So I initially came to USC as a bio major with a pre-pharmacy emphasis.
Mm-hmm.
I was planning on being a pharmacist for years and years and years beforehand, and then ended up switching to pre-med. But I actually had a friend of mine who was doing her BA in Biological Sciences and a BS in Pharmacology and Drug Development. And I was planning on just transitioning from a BS in bio to a BS in pharmacology. But she basically told me, like, oh, all you need is this 160 units of credit to get 2 degrees. And I was like, oh, no way. And I checked how much credit I had, and I realized I'd only have to take a summer class or 2 and then 18 units for my junior and senior year, and I would get it. So I realized that it wasn't as much work as I initially thought, and just decided to do it.
And then is it limiting you in any way, getting the BA instead of the BS for bio?
So in my personal opinion, I don't think it does. The only difference between the BA and the BS is the amount of lab classes that you have to take. And I was just looking at my schedule, looking at my pharmacology and drug development requirements, and then the potential of having BS requirements, and realizing maybe that's not as much workload as I would need. But in reality, I took just as many biology classes as any BS bio major. It's just I did not have as many labs.
Okay. Does that kind of screw you over, like, long term, as opposed to like getting the BS degree for whatever possible jobs or internships, anything like that?
I haven't personally experienced it, or I haven't even heard anything like that. The main difference between a Bachelor of Arts and a Bachelor of Sciences is just strictly the amount of classes that you take within the major that are, for example, specifically BISC classes, and obviously the lab limit that I previously talked about. But I feel personally I was able to get more of an eclectic / interdisciplinary view of biology and science pretty much as a whole from getting the BA.
Okay.
Yes.
And you came into USC. Did you go into it knowing that you wanted to do biological sciences, or was that something that kind of happened throughout the time?
So I since I previously said I was pre-pharm, there was a program that USC offers and still offers. It's called the TAP program. It's Trojan Admission Pharmacy. I don't know the acronym, but essentially a program that when you come into USC, if you apply to this program, you become this pharmacology and drug development major, and you have preferential admission into the USC School of Pharmacy as long as you maintain your GPA and everything like that. But it was one of the first years that program was a thing when I was applying to USC. And what I ended up finding out was I couldn't actually put that pharmacology and drug development major on there. So I just ended up applying as bio. USC,
why bio?
I mean, I've personally just ever since I was a kid loved science, and I was just going through it, had an AP bio class in high school, and just fell in love with the study as a whole.
Okay. And what does the study really entail? Like, what goes into a bio degree?
So I think it depends on where your specific interests are in biology. I personally love cell physiology or something along the lines of that, because again, I do want to be somewhere in the health field. And I think in terms of relevancy within bio, something like physio is what I'm looking for. So I personally was like, that's what I want to do. And I think that there was not really many other majors. I also didn't, maybe this is a little bit on me, I didn't do as much research as I could, maybe to do human bio, maybe specify in human bio. But I did do a top 3 because if I remember correctly, that was how it was on the Common App. So I did bio, human bio, and then psych, because I also had an AP psych class in high school and loved that as well.
Interesting. So then for the actual bio degree, what are the main topics that you can choose to go into it for? Like you can really fortify your studies on?
So within bio, it's pretty eclectic. You can look at something like marine biology. You can look at evolutionary biology. You can look at quantitative biology, which is, again, like more computational based, neurobiology, neuroscience, basically. And you can kind of just pick your way through various classes. You still have to take your introductory classes, obviously, but then you can there's a lot of flexibility from there.
And then, so then do you have to choose like one or the other when studying this, or no, you can study all of those things at once and you become like specialized in all of them?
You can become specialized in all of them. There is no real requirements besides BISC 120, BISC 220, which were the 2 intro to bio classes. And then from there, you can kind of take your own approach. Like I had a friend who was a biological sciences major. She did a lot of neurobio. So she took her intro classes, her biochemistry, her molecular biology, and then just kind of went into more neurobio classes. And I had friends who took computational classes, so they would kind of focus more on like computer science and building that into data and other different studies.
Okay. Let me ask you this then, because I feel a lot of people that go into biology or biological sciences are generally pre-med students. I know you're pre-pharmacology. Are those the only options for most people that go into this, or can somebody that's even pre-law get a bio degree?
So anyone can get a bio degree, and I think that's something that's awesome about USC and just a degree in general is you meet people in your classes that are from so many different walks of life or so many different career paths. Like there are people who want to get their PhD in biology, in a specific type of biology. There's, again, a lot of it is saturated with a lot of the pre-med, pre-health students. That's just the nature of the degree. But you can literally meet anyone. I had friends who were like business students and they were taking a biology class. I kind of asked them, I was like, why are you taking this class right now? And they were like, oh, it's a requirement. But they loved it just the same.
Okay. Interesting. So it's kind of cool when you're able to see people of all sorts of different academic disciplines come together in this degree. Have they maybe like shaped the way you looked at it a little bit, seeing somebody like from a business background look at the same problems that you are?
Yeah, I think it's the beauty of the study of biology, right? Biology, by definition, is the study of life. And I do think that there is a little bit more that can be said about that. You see all these different perspectives kind of coming in, and you can look at any biological issue from a various number of perspectives. An evolutionary biologist might have a different take than somebody who's a neurobiologist, and somebody who's a neurobiologist might have a different take than somebody who's computational. Or it's just the fact that you're able to see so many perspectives within a biology degree is really what makes that major very special. Interesting.
And then does this degree really, because I know biology is a very niche subject, like it really focuses on like human anatomy, marine biology, the quantitative, all those that you were saying, but do you also look at the health field as a whole and how what you're learning can apply to the health field later on, like maybe in the societal way?
Not explicitly. A lot of times the very basic biology classes, and even when you get into upper divs, a lot of it is content. Now, if you want to relate that to other fields by, for example, taking a global health class or a pharmacology class, and then a pharmacology class, just any other class, you can tie that in. But in terms of actual content, you're not usually explicitly trying to connect this to the real world. You're trying to just get because again, biology is a pretty dense subject.
Yeah.
Kind of get that knowledge initially, and then how you choose to connect it is up to you.
Do you wish that it connected more into the real world, like in the classroom time and everything, apart from you having to do it yourself?
I think so. I mean, again, having clinical relevance or real world relevance is obviously, at least in my personal opinion, a better way to be taught.
Mm-hmm.
Then you can feel like, okay, this applies to me. I can see this directly, because some of the biological principles that you learn are strictly theoretical. Like, I don't know about you, I can't see every cell, and I can't see a mitochondria being the powerhouse of the cell, which is something that you see all the time in biology.
Mm-hmm.
If there's something that we can connect this to, and I do think there are a couple classes, like, for example, there's a biochemistry class that is taught through nutrition.
Mm-hmm.
A class like that is obviously very relevant to who you are, or into just the real world. And I think,
what did you mean by it's taught through nutrition? Does that mean like it? Yeah.
Yeah. So you'll basically, processes like glycolysis, gluconeogenesis, all these different principles that you learn in your biology, biochemistry classes
Mm-hmm.
are just applied. So, okay, glycolysis is how you break down glucose.
Mm-hmm.
And what they'll do is they'll basically kind of tell you, like, okay, when you release glucose, you create these different net products. And the process by which you burn glucose is when you're exercising or something like that.
Gotcha.
And they'll have more realistic applications. Like, I think for that class, a friend of mine said that they tested their blood sugar when they were running. And it was like slightly more relevant to what they were, the real world.
Yeah, I like that personally. I feel like if I'm learning something that can be directly applicable to a real world thing, where, now whenever I'm running, I can check out my blood glucose levels and find that interesting and know exactly what that means. I think that's an incredible skill that class was teaching you guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was going to ask. So that was obviously an important class that you took. Were there any other classes that you felt were incredibly beneficial, that you learned the most from? Like, what shaped all of your bio knowledge, like from all these classes? Like, what were some of the core classes that really stuck out to you?
This is a little biased perspective. I personally really liked BISC 220,
Okay.
cell physio.
Mm-hmm.
I liked it more because there was a little bit more relevance to future clinical study. For example, when you're talking about physiology or movement or anything like that, and you're learning how that works from a cellular perspective, you can kind of be like, okay, so basically when you rotate your arm this way, this is essentially what's happening. Your cells are all shooting up action potentials from your nerves, so on and so forth. And you can kind of have a little bit more clinical relevance. I also think genetics was a class that was really awesome. BISC 325, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
Genetics was just very cool because you didn't just learn about other like species, you learned about how human genomics has evolved over time. And you learn that humans are pretty fascinating and that we're all actually more similar than we think. I think we're like 99.9% the same. Me and you are 99.9% the same. But those little differences, single nucleotide polymorphisms, sorry, I don't mean to bore everybody with.
No, I love it. Keep going.
Biological terminology, but something like we might differ at one genetic code, and that might be the difference to why you have long hair and why I'm unfortunately balding or something like that. But yeah, I think genetics was also a very cool class for me. I loved that.
Okay. And how do those, because I know you said BIS 220, which is a lower level class, which is also one of the, is it a GE class? Because I know a lot of people from all sorts of different majors have to take it.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure it's a GEG or something. I don't remember the letters. I apologize, but it can fill your general science requirements.
Okay. So how does that differ from some of the upper level classes that you have to take that are very specific to the biological science?
So what I tell people normally, if they ask me for advice, I tell them, if you're serious about your biological sciences degree or being in the health field in the future, those first core classes are very much different than the way that the upper divs are taught. So your core classes, your BISC 120, your BISC 220, those are 300-person lectures. So those classes, and again, you're seeing people from all different majors in those classes. Those classes are trying to give you a little bit of baseline knowledge, and then you can kind of specify. And I don't want to speak disparagingly about those classes, but full transparency, a lot of those basic classes are essentially weed out courses. And when I say weed out courses, I mean they may be slightly more difficult to you just because of the fact that you're in this new environment. Because a lot of times you take those during your freshman year.
I think it's actually a very important point that you brought out, and I think we should explain a little bit more about what a weed out course is, because some people might be unfamiliar about it. In your own words, what is a weed out class, and how does that exactly differ from most others?
Yeah, sorry.
No, you're good. So I think a weed out class is also a little bit more like trying to get people to quit, see if this is really what you're into. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I definitely think so. And as I'm kind of looking back on it with a little bit of retrospect, you kind of do need those weed out classes, because obviously your study load is going to be a lot for those classes, and you're not necessarily willing to, or not necessarily willing, or if you're not able to sustain that, maybe this field of science is a little bit
too much for you.
Yeah.
Okay. So in a way, the weed out classes, which are there to kick people out that aren't necessarily going to be great there, that shouldn't be there, they're beneficial because they really separate those who want to be there, who are willing to put in the work, from those that just are taking it, I don't want to say for fun, but they're not as serious about what they're doing.
Definitely. I would say so, just because, yeah, I mean, I just remember freshman year being like, oh my God, I have to study 1 million hours to get this grade, freaking out over my general classes. And I think those general classes do kind of teach you the most effective way for you to study. Because in order to be successful, I personally, my own study habits, I have to repeat the information to myself 1 million times over, write it down. And I think I realistically went through like 2 500-page notebooks, like for my BISC 120 and BISC 220.
Wow.
And I have to talk myself through a lot of these situations or a lot of these concepts. And you'd see me, I'd be crazy in like McCarthy Quad, just like talking. Would be like, oh my God, this guy is either a homeless guy who's talking to himself, or he's a stressed out pre-med student. Thankfully, it was the latter, but it was definitely, those classes were incredibly rewarding in the fact that it taught me how to be as effective as I could be in studying.
So what were some of the other skills that you developed from this major?
So I learned the importance of, I think I drastically improved my work ethic.
Okay. In what ways?
In terms of staying on top of things. What I learned was, in order for me to really be as effective as I possibly can, I have to not only just review the material once, I had to review it multiple times over. Once directly after we had this lecture, a couple days later, and then like a week later, and continually build upon these different concepts. So that way I know in my head, I can recite this information like it's the back of my hand. Like, hand to God, I can tell you a lot of the very basic biochem stuff like it's no tomorrow. I can literally probably repeat glycolysis to you 1 million times over.
Interesting. And you weren't like this at the beginning, right? Like this was something that you had to develop through a major. Okay. So for somebody that's going into this and they're kind of nervous, they're like, I don't think I can study all this. I don't think I can memorize all these things. Like, so this wasn't something that just happened overnight. It took years of developing and taking these classes.
It's a gradual improvement.
Okay.
But what I will say to a lot of these people is try it out. And what I'd also say is it's okay for, let's say, your first exam, you don't do the greatest. It's fine. It's probably your first ever real exam in college. And you're sitting there, like quiet little freshman, being like, oh my God, I didn't get the grade that I want. I'm telling you, it's okay. You're gonna start to notice, okay, maybe this way worked for me. Maybe this way did it. Maybe this way of studying worked for me. Maybe this way didn't. And you're just going to continually improve on yourself through those classes.
Okay. I like that. So I do have to ask, though, because that little freshman that doesn't know what they're doing first exam, what kind of people do you think will do well in this major? They will succeed?
I think somebody who's willing to put the time in. I think people who don't necessarily need short-term gratification. Because, I don't know, me personally, full transparency, didn't do the greatest in those classes initially. I was okay. I thankfully did okay, but I knew that, okay, if I keep working, I'm going to do better. And if I showed you my transcript, you'd be like, okay, your freshman year, your sophomore year, you weren't doing too great in these classes. But junior, senior year, I got a lot better. And I think that that's something that if you're willing to put the time in, again, as I previously mentioned, you're going to do great.
Okay. I like that. And as far as the actual daily life of it goes, I know being pre-pharmacology, pre-med, any pre-health emphasis for the most part, or taking a STEM class, it is very time consuming. It's something that does eat up your life and it becomes a part of you. So what was your daily schedule kind of like? What kind of classes were you taking throughout like this last year, for instance?
So this last year I would take, and this is something that I actually kind of want to talk about with the BA. You don't have to just take BISC courses. I emailed my academic advisor and I was like, hey, are there any classes that can substitute for an upper division bio course in other fields? So that way I could kind of look. And there was gerontology classes, there were global health classes. There were all these different classes that you can kind of do that maybe are not as labor intensive that can kind of supplement some of that. But for example, my last semester at USC, I was taking the most units I'd ever taken, but I got the best grades. I got straight A's. I got a 4.0. And it was, let me see, I took two. Thank you. Thank you. I don't mean to toot my own horn. But
No, you deserve it.
I had a 2-unit directed research class that was 10 hours a week. I had essentially a developmental neuroscience class. I had a brain and health and disease class. I had a oh God, what else am I forgetting? I can just check.
Those sound incredibly interesting though, like brain and what was it? Brain and
so it was developmental neuroscience. It was essentially the brain in disease.
Okay.
I can just check. Let me check for you. Sorry. But again, I was taking almost entirely STEM classes, but I was still able to see like all these different things and be successful. So like if you were to show freshman year me, Jesus, what's going on? If you had to show freshman year me, my course load, freshman year would probably freak out and be like, what is this? How can you do all this? But it's all literally just based on getting through those classes. And I'm still able to actually have the most fun I could. So I think a thing that's important to touch on is finding a delicate balance between work and fun. Because if you just study 24/7, one, that's not as effective for you. Two, you're not going to enjoy your experience at USC. And USC is such a great institution for being able to find that work-study balance. I was able to go to all the football games. I was able to go out with friends. I was able to do all of this.
So you're still able to maintain that social life.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
And while you're doing it, like maintaining a social life is incredible. Were you also able to maybe like do work if you wanted to, do internships on the side and things of that nature?
Yeah. So I was able to work as a clerk actually at my dad's pharmacy a couple weekends, like 2 or 3 weekends a month. And it's really all about finding what works best for you in terms of time management. Because you can do all of this. Would I tell you, but on the opposite spectrum of that, I would also say don't stretch yourself out too thin, because it's very possible to just get lost in a million different things and then ultimately become just a person who can't be as successful academically just because I have a million different internships and research opportunities. Maybe focus on a couple of them that you're very much passionate about, and you'll be able to find the time.
Okay. And then looking back at it now, because you just graduated, you're able to see everything with 20/20 vision. What were some of the highlights and lowlights of this major?
I want to kind of actually couple a low light with a highlight. It was so freshman year bio 120. I know I'm touching on bio 120 a lot, but it was actually a very transformative class for me. One, it was because it was actually the worst grade I ever got in a class at USC. So that was not great. But secondly, what I found was I found friends through that class. I mean, mind you, we were all struggling through it, but literally I lived in Parkside, IRC, and every day after our bio 120 class, me and my friends would just sit and study. And and it wasn't even just studying, it was studying, talking, eating lunch together. And I was able to form these lifelong friendships that I still maintain today through that class.
So it's like you guys were all struggling together, created a sense of camaraderie with one another, where you're all going into battle with one another, like not with one another, but with you guys are going to battle together against this class.
Yeah. So I think that's also something that I would 100% emphasize to people. I understand, step outside of your comfort zone a little bit, because you're going to meet people who are very much into the same things that you are. And by extension, you're going to be able to form these friendships that you guys can work together. You guys can hang out. And especially as a freshman, it's very hard. You want to find your little niche of people and ultimately extend out from that. So honestly, sit next to that person in that biology class. I understand it's a very big lecture hall. Try and sit next to somebody. Be like, hey, nice to meet you. My name's X. Are you also a bio major? Or are you also this major? Tell me a little bit about yourself. And you're going to be able to maybe be like, hey, here's my number if you want to study together. And through those, and just basically through trial and error, you're going to find a group of people.
So it's very important then to create that community around you of other STEM or other people that are going through the same thing with you,
of course,
in order to succeed with it.
Because in my personal opinion, you can't just lean on yourself for a lot of this. At times, it's definitely going to be daunting, and it's definitely better to have friends that you can kind of talk through not only school, but just life in general. Because I mean, to sit here and say that your college experience is going to be absolutely perfect and you're not going to go through trials and tribulations is a little ridiculous.
Very true. Let me ask you this, because you did also finish, and I think you're able to give us a different viewpoint that most people don't get. How has your perception of the field changed now that you're done with everything? Has it shifted from when you first started?
That's a great question. I think I was always going into it focusing on pre-health. So my perspective might be a little biased in the sense that I still see the biology classes that I took with clinical relevance. But I can totally understand that for a lot of people, it might have changed. They might have found a new passion and maybe want to focus on a different area. But for me personally, it was more like the field hasn't changed. I still see biology as a fundamental thing that you have to study in order to, I think, understand a health-based career.
Okay. And as far as these health-based careers go, do most people end up getting like a master's, some sort of higher level degree with it? Or do people also get jobs, like really good jobs with just the BA or just the BS in this?
My perspective may be a little slanted again. Sorry.
No, that's fine. Hey, it's your experience. Your whole experience is what we want to hear.
My story.
You're the star.
No, God, no. Everyone who I am still talking to, who I met in these biology classes, we were all pre-health. So a lot of them decided to maybe go try and get their MD, their PharmD, their DDS, all these different things. And they were very focused on that goal. I have met friends who have decided now to do PhDs in these studies who are initially thinking of things. And I think that they're working in labs now and they're getting paid pretty well. In terms of people who are just straight out bio, I don't know, maybe getting an MS, maybe getting a PhD in something specialized will yield more careers, but I'm sure that there are people who can get successful jobs just from
the degree itself. Okay. Very interesting. I do want to ask something interesting to me because I'm a philosophy guy. I love learning about ethics, all these moral dilemmas and everything. Do you guys actually get into maybe different ethical questions about biology, maybe through genes, like affordability of certain medicine, anything like that?
I don't think that we get into those. I can understand the basics of how stem cell transplants work. I can understand how gene therapy works. We don't really get into the ethics behind it. I actually did, though. Funny story. I took a pharmacology class that I think is open to everybody. Mm-hmm. It's RxRS 412, if I believe, and it's actually a class where it's an ethics class. So what they'll do is they'll teach you basic ethical principles such as beneficence, non-maleficence, all these different ethical perspectives. And what they'll do is you can have a weekly debate. So basically 2 of your classmates will have a pro side and a con side on a topic such as stem cell transplantation or affordability of medication, or informed consent, or different topics. And they will debate. And I think that was actually a very great class because it took these ideas that I learned in my biology classes and applied it to relevance, like a relevant program.
And was that unusual for most of these bio classes, or like to have these open discussions about these kinds of topics?
Yeah, because I feel like a lot of the bio classes are incredibly structured in the way that they are. And it's probably because they've just been doing these classes for years.
And how are they structured?
They're structured in terms of, okay, we're going to have this lecture. Mm-hmm. As you get into your upper divs, you can deviate from your lectures slightly. But in a lot of those general bio classes, you're going to basically just be learning the science behind it. You're not going to be really talking about how this is going on right now, or if you want, like, connecting it to current events or things like that.
Okay. So is it more so of a just sit down, listen to the professor, give a lecture for like an hour and a half, 2 hours, and then discuss it on your own time? Or do you guys actually integrate classroom discussions, debates, and everything into a majority of the classes there?
It's definitely the first class. It's definitely the first, where it's okay. A lot of times you're listening to this professor lecture. You can ask questions during the lecture and after class. But yeah, you don't really, or at least my personal experience, you don't really get into these topics besides from a scientific perspective.
Okay.
Like affordability of medication, for example, I can use that. I never learned that. I didn't really learn much about that in my bio class. Mm-hmm. I learned how maybe medications are created. I learned it more in my pharmacology classes, definitely. But I learned the scientific knowledge behind it. I didn't really talk as much in those classes. And maybe that's just because you could sit there for hours and hours and hours and discuss these things. Mm-hmm. But a lot of it was science-based.
Okay. And then would you want to improve it in that way? Or even a better question, if you could improve the field in one way, like make any change, if magic wand, wave it, you can improve it, what would you want to improve on it?
No exams.
No exams.
I would definitely say, like, tying things back to something that's currently going on.
Okay.
Or maybe, God, I don't want to ask people to do more than they already have to, because again, it is a lot. But like, even finding a paper, maybe a week, or finding an article and trying to connect a biological topic to something that's currently relevant. Because I mean, a lot of things are based in biology. Maybe finding something like that, so that way you can have more real world relevance.
Real world relevance is incredibly important, showing that you're able to connect what you're really learning and how to apply it in the real world. Exactly. I think that's one of the most important skills anybody can learn to do.
Exactly.
And then Now it's your turn to really apply what you've learned to the real world. So
Yeah,
what are
exactly.
some of your own goals? I know you're applying to med school right now. What are some of your own goals with that?
So I hope one day, knock on wood, to be an orthopedic surgeon.
Mhm.
That's something that I've had the pleasure to shadow a couple of orthopedic surgeons, and I just fell in love with the field. Everything about it.
Okay. And then as far as getting the background in biology, do you think it's going to prepare you well enough to start this next chapter of your journey?
100%. I think because, mind you, the medical school is different because you have to take the MCAT, and you have to have a pretty good base of biology to get a successful MCAT score or a good MCAT score. But I think definitely USC has prepared me both inside and outside the classroom in terms of biological relevance for medical school.
Okay. Before we end, I love to ask this one question, and I think it's the most important question of this podcast. What advice would you give to someone who's unsure about what major to choose and someone who's just starting to study your major?
Someone who's unsure about what major to choose?
Also somebody, go for it.
Yeah, okay. So someone who's unsure about what major to choose, I'd say it's okay. I would say take classes that seem interesting to you during your first year or two at USC. Take that art history class, take that biology class, take that engineering class, take that business class. It's okay to not know what you want to do yet. And honestly, it's great because then once you find something that you click with, you can kind of go into it further. So I definitely say it's okay. Once you get to your sophomore or junior year, I'd maybe say, hey, was there any class that you thought was really awesome? Maybe try and focus on that. But someone who's like a little freshman, I'd say totally, it's fine. Take whatever classes you feel like taking. Because a lot of those classes are going to be credit for something. Whether it's a GE or ultimately, if you do end up choosing a major, your major. Someone who's just starting to study your major, I'd also say it's okay. You're gonna be definitely a little bit overloaded those first couple, like that first class or two. It's okay. Take a deep breath. Try not to kill yourself over the difference between a 95 and a 90. It's okay. You don't have to get straight A's on every exam to be successful. You really don't have to do that. 1, 2, try and find a study group. Try and find just a group of people in your class that are probably struggling like you, or even who are just don't really know what to do or don't really feel like reaching out. Be that person that reaches out, because there's probably 50 people in your class that want to reach out but just aren't maybe able to, or kind of scared to. If you're the one, be that guy. I was that guy, and I can tell you I had great success with it. I have made friends that hopefully will last a lifetime. I mean, Pedram, the host of this podcast, I've met as a senior in that HP class.
That's true.
And that was actually we both started talking to each other and we ended up having a lot more in common.
And after taking that class, I can with full confidence say you are that guy, George. You are that guy who's outgoing. You're willing to go talk to everybody. And I think it's an incredible thing about you.
Yeah.
So I want to say thank you so much. The incredible George Michael, everybody. George, thanks so much for being on the podcast today.
Thank you guys. Look forward to hearing it.